Oh, it's got starting. I feel like I need intro music. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Cepheus Protocol podcast. This one's a pretty big one, actually. So, during the past few months, the team has been looking into implementing the co op systems into the game. Things such as synchronizing between players, rendering the world, how all of the various systems are going to work with more than one client at a time. But the longer we were looking at it, the more issues started to crop up. Almost none of the way anything works right now is set up to handle multiplayer, and it's going to be a massive effort to retrofit everything to handle even some limited co-op experiences. The devs have had a meeting. They discussed options on what could be done, and rest assured, everyone's committed to delivering the multiplayer experience that's been promised. But rather than trying to cram co-op into the existing spaghetti code and praying that everything doesn't just collapse, the ongoing cleanup efforts that have been underway for a while now are going to be completely overhauled and expanded. To put it simply, the devs are going to be rebuilding a lot of the current game systems on a clean version of the base code. So it's going to be a pretty intensive chunk of work. We're talking everything from the way units move to we were just talking about fog of war before. But it'll allow the team to take all the experience they've obtained so far during development and recreate the game so it runs and plays much smoother than the current version. I'll let Denevere go into some more detail.
Yeah, so in essence, this approach allows the team take not only the multiplayer capability to a higher state, but from day one, but will also allow us to fix issues that have been present in some aspects of the game for a significant period of time. Such as unit pathfinding, infected AI and behavior, and some of the general jank the game sometimes struggles with. Later down the line, this will allow the devs to revisit some systems and areas that were too bloated, essentially, and the players have suggested are too disjointed, I guess, and or confusing. Such as the overall civilian interactions covering evacuations, ambient civilians in the streets, and civilian forts that appear around the map. For roughly the next 2 hours, we'll be going over uh, not only the progress that has been made, but also talk in depth about what a lot of this work will entail and all of the benefits that will be gained from this approach that we've chosen. I would like to hand this over to Robert to go into much more detail than what I've got. Robert?
So, in a nutshell, let's just break right into it. Is that we looked at the poll, and the poll outstandingly voted for co-op. Like, it won everything. I'm going to bring it up on my screen right now so you guys get some context of what won, what lost. So, right here, you're looking at the poll results. This is public, so you guys can go to the last Steam post and just go down to the bottom and read it at your own leisure and see what people said and see what was the most common concerns people had. And right here we have co-op at 141 votes. And then that's followed by the new vehicle AI, the campaign, police anarchists, and then basically infected AI and so on and so forth. So we can't do anything about the police and the anarchists to 1.4. That's still the plan going into that version. But it made no sense. I left the Saturday podcast last week and I spent another day or two salvaging, cleaning up systems for Chelsea's AI. And I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, you figure if I go in, I change this, then we have to change it again when we add co-op. We have to redo and audit and clean up the systems again. So it made no sense. And then I remembered buying Rust 10 years ago. And I remember seeing a post where they were like, we done fucked up. The game was released in one state. And then the game evolved and changed over years to the point where it wasn't what they originally intended the game to be. And it was built off an older prototype in their case. In our case, it was like, well, the game released as in 2020 is no longer what it is 3 to 4 years later. And it's become this like behemoth in terms of the bugs and the other issues. And it's one of those things where we're like, if we're going to fix this, let's fix it properly. Let's not cut any corners. And let's at the same time, from a foundational standpoint, implement co-op. So then that way, it's like, look, like it's all the bells and whistles that everyone's wanted. And we're going in this from a standpoint. Let me just see if I can scroll down here. Oh, that's all I need to show there. So we're going into it from a standpoint of, look, like we need to vet each system, bring over the systems that can be salvaged. Like in Q4, we did the actor ability system, and we did other things that basically like work regardless, and they're great, they're beautiful. But those systems need to be ported over the replication. That's easy compared to all the other systems that we'd have to like redo and delete in the old legacy code. So we essentially went over and brought over some of the systems sequentially over time, and we're still doing it. It's an ongoing process. I mean, after I finish this podcast, I'm going to probably punch another 8 hours. And then tomorrow I'll do another 12 hours because I'm doing 12-hour days so this is done. So that's just me. Obviously, everyone else on the team is doing more like reasonable numbers. But you figure when it comes down to it, I'm just trying to get this done and get it to the point where we can get it back out to you guys on the experimental branch. So the plan going ahead is here. Let me just kind of pull up this sheet I have here. Is making sure there's intentionality in how everything is programmed. It's more performant, like what Winter was hitting on upon, where like there are more floodgates and more limiters in place where we don't try and do too much in one frame, where you get those spikes, and we properly reference and dereference objects. So when you open up some UI prompts, you don't get frame rate spikes because you're loading assets that are tied to that UI, but you don't need them in that moment, and they're instant loads. So it's that kind of stuff where we're going through and we're doing all that, but at the same time, we're implementing it from a foundational aspect of co-op. So it's really big for us. And here, let me bring up the SDK and I'll show you guys. Is that, let me share my screen and switch over to the SDK. So this is essentially the SDK that we've essentially ported the game over in terms of like, let me go into my top-down example map that I built. And I'm gonna have to like finesse this a little bit. We're gonna put this here. We're gonna F11 that. And then we're gonna put the second player over here. So you can see we have 2 players right here. And essentially what I need to do is I need to delete that infected because I was testing something earlier before the podcast started. So let me grab some circ. And I'm going to spawn in. All right, let me pull over a second viewport. Hold on, it's being silly. It went on another monitor for some reason. I hate when it does that. Give me one moment. It's acting silly. But give me 1 second. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Put that over there. We're going to put this over here. And I went in this week and I was like, you know what? Let's just see what it would take. Let's get it set up from the onset. So I reprogrammed the camera controls from the ground up, utilizing the best standards. Because like I think Terminal is a good example of this. That woman breaks our game probably every other week when it comes to the camera controls. So I'm going to probably try and get her a build and some other builds that I know to see if they can break the camera like they normally do. And I redid the whole camera system. So that weird pivot that you would have when you would rotate is gone. Like when you would do free look, you would rotate around this weird invisible circle. And that was just garbage. I hated that. I spent the time to retrofit it and get rid of it. So now you have a proper zoom that basically, does all that. And it supports replication and all that. So if I go over here and I tell her to move, that's replicated between two clients co-op. So you figure if I tell them to move over here and go up and go around, well, she thinks that she can jump up that, but she can't. I haven't added jumping functionality, but you figure like it's perfectly replicated. So the second client right there would be the equivalent of your friend playing co-op with you. And essentially, I spent the time just getting all that set up, getting the formation system ported over, and salvaging the systems that we could salvage. My goal is to wrap up the formation and some of the movement going into next week and just get everything replicated. So then that way, taking damage, shooting, formations, the fundamentals of an RTS game are replicated. And then going into next week and the week after that, we'll start doing more of the nuanced systems that are unique to our game. So like the doctrines, like DNA research. What else is there? The ability system, and then getting the UI in, and then the income and SOC system. So we're gonna have weekly updates. And these weekly updates are going to be like, hey, this is what we've gotten on co-op. And again, with this new push, this new goal, that would mean that our initiative is getting into the point where co-op is ready in your hands in an experimental form in the end of that 3-month tenure. We're just like, we're going to clean up the whole project, not having to deal with the legacy systems and fight them, and just building them up from a better foundation and having a better understanding of the engine. But then also the better tutorials, documentations, and tools that we have available to us than they were 7 years ago, technically when we started in 2017, allows us to build it faster and better than what it was before. Because right now, just right off the bat, this camera is light years better than the one that's currently on experimental and on the normal public build. And I'm going to try and get you guys a beta often. I was going to try and do it today. No guarantees, but I was going to try and get like a beta often under experimental. So if you want to go in and play around with the camera, play around with like just essentially like seeing how the combats are shaping up, how the navigation's moving, you won't necessarily be able to test the replication per se. Unless I guess we could do a shipping build. And then if you knew how to port forward, or if you had a friend that was on the same LAN, you could like type in their IP address and connect. But we don't have the Steam master servers integrated yet. That's going to be one of the last things we do is add that. So then that way there's like a master server you can like find clients and games from. So right now, everything in this experimental form, this very raw form that we're going to be testing and other people are going to be testing, will be based off of just essentially, doing it the old-fashioned way of typing in an IP address. And then we'll implement more complicated aspects of connecting as we get closer to getting into your guys' hands. But again, you can see all that's replicating and all that's working from a multiplayer standpoint. One of the other things they have to do is set it up so you can gift. Because right now, any player can control any unit is the only problem. I think I bugged the camera out into this wall. So it looks like there's a bug there I got to fix. So that's something I got to look into. But hold on. 1 second. Don't know why the Unreal Engine feels a necessity to put it inside out. Like it'll put monitors on the second players out of your monitor, so you can't select some things. But yeah, you can see that the problem right now is that there's no like anyone can control your units when you're in co-op. So I'm gonna set up a system where you can gift units like in Total War. So then that way, like if little Timmy doesn't want you playing around with his heavy that you set up on a road, and you don't want to accidentally grab someone, you can basically just like lock it. So you can select it like this, but it wouldn't let it. So we'll add some kind of like ownership, like, oh, this unit is currently owned by like this player. So you can't touch that unit. You can't do anything with it unless they give it to you, or their settings allow you to control their units. And we'll run that to you guys and get some QA and some feedback, and we'll adjust accordingly. Because right now, off the top of our head, we were going for a base level of Total War implementation. And then if that's not enough, or people feel like they want more nuance to it, then we'll address it when we actually get it in your hands and we're playtesting it with y'all. So there's that aspect. Now, the other aspect is I'll show a little more intense is the where is it? The player test map. So the player test map is what I've been kind of working on to essentially get really quick, rapid prototyping of gameplay mechanics without having to like essentially like do some of the RTS elements right off the bat, is I can get the core aspects of gameplay. Because like if I shoot this guy, it still works the same way between RTS and TPS. TPS being third person, RTS being real-time strategy. So the idea is like right there, you can see he doesn't die. That's because I haven't replicated that. That's where I left off yesterday. So you figure when I pick it up after the podcast, I'm going to add it in so that way the host is the left side, the client's on the right. The host saw the person die because he's authoritative. He can see everything. The client doesn't know what happened. The client has to be told that, hey, he died, play this and keep everything in synchronization. So I'll be putting that in and then showcasing it either tonight, Sunday, or on Monday when I do another ping on our Discord. So that way I can kind of keep you guys in a loop of our co-op progress and just kind of bringing systems in alignment with later standards. Because as I do this, I'm rewriting their entire system for how they take damage, how hit reactions are processed. I mean, every aspect of the game is being redone, you know, from a foundational standpoint. So like if I spawn in and I show you the perspective on the client side, oh, okay, I got a crash. Let me copy that and save that into my channel for investigation later. Okay, hold on. Let me reload the SDK so I can show you guys. Oh, you know what? I think I know what that is. So I know what that is. Yeah, but
Classic
that's
live experience. It's not a
oh
live
yeah,
experience
but it
unless
is what
it
it
crashes.
is. I mean, you figure this has not been really QA'd or tested
Yeah.
for crashes. If crashes happen while we're testing, then they're fixed. But if I shoot him, you can see again. Oh, it didn't crash. But like you can see again that basically like he just stopped moving on the client thing. And he's even reacting. He's trying to dodge my bullets. So like if I aim at him for too long, we have a prototype. So the rubber banding, just so you guys know, is because he moves in the client, but the host is like, you're cheating. That's a speed hack. If my code doesn't allow you to move in that way at this very moment, so I'm going to reset you. So that's why he does that. But that was one of the things that we're going to implement in the RTS and the TPS, is having it where they can sidestep or move out of your aim when units are shooting and they're stationary. They add more nuance and more realistic like gameplay where there's more of a counterplay for like, it's not just bang, 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 they're dead, then GG. So that's one of the things that we've been basically testing. And then you'll also see that basically when they spawn in, they have melee weapons sometimes. Oh, okay. Oh, that was literally one of the last things I was working on. So if he hits me, it crashes. That's kawaii. Again, I was literally working on this last night, all night. So I need to kind of like fix that crash per se. But you figure essentially they have melee weapons. So that was one of the changes that I was really instrumental in pushing in from other games that I've seen as well, and just from Resident Evil 4. And it will affect the RTS aspect as well, where RTS element characters will spawn in with melee weapons that your units can shoot to disarm. So if I shoot him, his arm comes off. It's live dismemberment. Got the idea from Fallout 4. So essentially that will also replicate over to the RTS. There's a bug where sometimes if you shoot his head off, the arm comes back. I'm fixing that also as far as the replication fixes. I have to limit it to where you can only break one per se. And then the other one is just basically, because they start a bleed out time. So that was one of the other mechanics that I put into the game, is that you can also turn them into crawlers dynamically in RTS and in normal. So he'll fall down and then he'll crawl after you. Again, this is all very raw and part of just what we prototyped a while ago in CPO. And we've wanted to bring over to the RTS aspects. So again, this is part of like little things that I'm kind of working out and making all work together. So then that way it's a cohesive experience for like, as you're shooting people, whether it be in the RTS or the TPS, it's more immersive and it's funner to zoom in and watch. So that way if your vehicle shoots someone, it will calculate the health damage and you could blow off people's limbs. Now, me and Michael have talked about doing a Ghost of Tsushima approach where basically you can like blow off additive parts, but it's more of a technical thing where like we'd have to break up the characters into more subdivisions to do that. But like you figure that makes the characters more inherently expensive because then you have to calculate each individual component on top of calculating originally just the base thing. So we might just apply a technical limitation of just having it to where you can only blow off one limb and then they start a bleed out timer and the rest of the body is limited for right now. And then if we can figure out a cheaper way of accomplishing having it like Ghost of Tsushima where you can blow off like multiple body parts or whatever, or like other games, then we'll like Killing Floor is a good example. But you figure because of the sheer amount of infected we have to have in the game, which is going to be like more than Killing Floor. Killing Floor maxes out around like 30 to 50 AI. We're gonna have a minimum of like dying. That was the game. This the bike one. What was the bike one? I always forget it. Days Gone. We're looking at like 300 infected. So there are trade-offs where like when you have that many and then you're replicating them and then you're having to tick them and they can be in different parts of the world. There's like Chris explained last week, there are concessions technically that you have to make to fit it all within your budget. And then there are also like limitations in terms of that. So again, that is what we're doing. And again, it's the easiest way to show the limb and then shoot the disarm is in the TPS module. Because when it comes to RTS, it'll be happenstance. It'll be based off of spread, things like that, where they'll just shoot the arm, shoot the head based off of them just shooting the AI. And then that way you'll get some nuance to like, oh, like he shot off the leg that time, or he shot off the arm that time, or he shot off the head this time. And it'll look cool in the confines when you're zooming in. Now, the other thing, before we go to what everyone else has been working on, is that, let me see, I covered take, hit, giving, def. And then basically, I'll show you one more thing before I show you the next thing. So we have our large RTS test map that Derek was working on last night because we just ported over the Fog of War system. And you figure we have that working now in this little prototype. And we're going back and we're hyper-optimizing it based off of what we learned and making it to where it supports co-op by doing the client-side calculations on their side, but so the server doesn't have to send Fog of War updates to everyone. So we were going to do it that way to keep the load on the host minimal, and everyone just recalculates it based off of what's going on in the world. And then you figure like this is one of our test maps, so we were just making sure that the Fog of War updates and querying and like basically like optimizing it. So again, this is our little test map. This is what we did last night. Rather, this is what Derek's been working on, is the Fog of War and the optimization and just basically linking that into the making sure it's optimized. The next thing I wanted to show before we go back would be what we talked about briefly, is that this was built on a CPO base that we built a while ago. And essentially, one thing that you're going to kind of get just kind of like shoehorned in there, it's going to be kind of snuck in there as an alternate mode where you can essentially play. We want to replicate this. So by replicating the base gameplay, this carries over to the rest of gameplay. You guys are just getting this for free. Where the idea is that like you can level out your operators in this mode and then bring them into RTS. So the idea is like you figure you can essentially go and play this little mode with your friends, is the idea, to basically like, it's like World War Z, I guess you can say. So you can hit this little meat slab, it's a prototype, the alarm sounds, and then infected spawn in. And this was another thing that we wanted to push to kind of have like a truly like hybrid game, is not make the operator a gimmick and really kind of push it as far as we could in terms of the underlying mechanics. Now, of course, it's going to crash again because I put in that last-minute fix last night that I shouldn't have. It's related to basically them playing a def hit sound effect, and I didn't put in a safety there. That's my fault. I shouldn't have. Well, I did it last night, and then I left. So you figure, but in the confines of what you guys are going to be playing, essentially you have that mode, and then you would have a time trial mode that you can also play whenever the hell you want. And you can level up your TPS, RTS operator in these modes and play with your friends. So you can. So the idea is we wanted to kind of like have it where you can go up and you can buy this turret, or you can buy mines or whatever. And it was kind of like our way of like making like a, I guess you could say like almost like a Fortnite type experience where it's like a bunch of different game modes and ideas that are built around the core of Cepheus for the infected, you know, or like DMZ versus like Call of Duty. So again, you have this, and then you have the other mode that I just want to show off real quickly, which would be the the stages. And again, these aren't really kind of getting touched at all during this 3-month period. This is just more so showing what you guys are getting as part. So like when people go into the experimental, when I patch it, and they're going to be like, what the f is this? Like, where did all this come from? You know, kind of deal. So let me put on God mode so I don't kill someone. And then, yeah. But the idea is like you figure like this is like a little time trial mode that we have where you get kills and it gives you points. And you can, oh, that's a debug circle. I was debugging why they wouldn't face me correctly in gameplay. Oh, it's gonna crash again. I think someone killed themselves. One of the blow up guys killed himself. And we were also using that to essentially just kind of benchmark and test the AI and like ask how they react and like counter your circ. Because we could like prototype their individual AI personalities and their strategies here. And then all we do is we just kind of put another layer in where it's like an AI director in the RTS mode. So then that way it's giving them like their total initiatives and their plans and their goals that they're working towards. But then we can like prototype like the low level combat of like how does a blow up guy operate when there's like a bunch of people? How does he calculate when he should blow up versus meleeing? When is the spitter spit versus just running after you? And that way we can play it from a very grounded low level perspective. And it's just easier to see what's going on. So that way we can get the attention to detail and the level of quality that you're looking for. So the people that want to record gameplay, sit there and actually zoom in, get those details. But when you're zoomed out and you're playing an RTS, those details are turned off. They're obfuscated to save performance. Because again, you don't need to replicate and send that if you're not able to see it. You know, if you're like 1,000 feet up, there's no point in doing that. So it's one of those things where it's like you do that to kind of like mitigate, you know, your pros and your cons and just kind of balance load kind of deal for performance. And that's something that we've kind of learned the hard way over time instead of trying to do everything live. Was our mistake when we started. And it was just like more of like a noob. It's a noob mistake where it's like you don't need to run everything live. You need to virtualize and fake elements, especially when you're making an RTS game. So that in a nutshell is everything that's coming to experimental. When you see me say done experimental up, is that you figure there's one more thing I can show. And then we'll segue over to what everyone else is working on. So if I go to the main menu map, and again, this main menu is being deleted and redone. So right now, okay, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. Efren is not on because he's in the wildfire area of Los Angeles. So right now he has no power. He hasn't been able to work on that much this week because he's been dealing about, you know, losing his house. So it's one of those things where it's like, we don't have much to show for the new map for the main menu. We'll have hopefully a week or two from now when everything calms down for the Los Angeles wildfires. He has been learning photogrammetry, and I'll show some of that in a second from his reports channel. But keep in mind, this map is not representative of like where this map is going to be gutted and changed over. But I can show you the operator customization that we were working on last. And this will basically be ported over. And this was the basic idea that we were going with for like this operator. You build them and you customize them, and they're your heroes, your generals, your leaders in RTS and TPS. So if you want to go and grind out an operator in those modes that I showed you for 6 hours and then bring him into RTS as the ultimate mecha hero, that's your life. Do what you want to do. Live you. So like if I want to change out to the FAMAS and then I want to like, you know, put some attachments on. I haven't leveled up this gun, so I can't show you the attachments per se. I'll show you guys maybe next week. But the yeah, and then you figure like you can just change out the weapons and then the gear, and then there'll be another thing we add for abilities. Every weapon has a leveling system. Every character has a leveling system. And the idea is that basically you can customize your weapons in this little like gunsmith. And then you can bring them in, and they'll have a different weapon pool than the traditional characters in RTS. They'll have some that come over, but they'll have these preliminary weapons that just distinguish them and make them a little bit more like standoff, like different. Let me go back. And then you can just choose your... I wonder if that's going to... No, it didn't crash. Okay. I haven't tested these in the better part of like 6 months to a year when we prototyped this a long time ago. So this has just been sitting in a repo. And then you can make profiles of like your heroes. So your profile would be like each commander or hero that you name to basically bring in and fight for you in RTS, you know, or TPS, whatever's your jam. So that's everything that we're working on. Again, I want to stress this. is that these elements, these TPS modules, are only being replicated and changed to the extent that it affects the RTS element to streamline and make that process quicker. These like TPS elements really aren't going to be authored and improved and changed that much, besides just fixing the crashes that you saw. And then from that, basically just again focusing on the RTS because that's the bread and the butter. And then once that's situated, then we'll address the other areas as needed. Let me check my notes. I showed the fog of war. Perception system, it's not really much to show there. It's trivial. Is there anything else? No, there's not really else to show because we can't really show the ability system that we brought over from Cepheus. So that's everything. That's all the directive. That's all the initiatives that we're working on. Now, at surface value, to give you an example, once I replicate in that test map the TPS elements of like the shooting, the dying, throwing grenades, converted over from projectile to hit scan for optimization reasons, then those will replicate and automatically work in the horde mode, the arcade mode, and all that other stuff. So you guys will be getting a lot of content down the pipe to basically like keep you guys busy per se, while we're just kind of tightening all the stuff up. I don't know if I'm going to ship it in development mode so you guys can use the console command, because again, the priority isn't going to be right off the bat. You guys can jump in the sessions with each other. It's going to be more so to evaluate and test like how the camera and the movement and the formations and the pathfinding are. Because again, this month is foundation month. This month is like we're to hit upon pathfinding, formations, optimization, circ. It's circ and foundation month. Then when that's done with some bleed over, I'm sure going into February is infected month. Getting them up to par, making AI changes where needed, making sure they're all replicated, converting all of their like melees and their blow-ups to abilities. Because once we replicate the base ability system, we can make a blow-up guy a blow-up an ability, and it just works in co-op now. So it's like one of that thing where you just kind of make systems work for you, and you fit them within the confines of like what you've already pre-established, like writing an ability system, and then having an AI enact that ability instead of running unique code just for the blow-up or just for a melee, kind of deal. So it just works, I guess you could say. And that's the ideology or the approach that we're taking going into this, so we can just get more mileage, more bang for our buck when we do something, Okay, so then there's that. Okay, that's everything I got from my side. So now Derek's, I already covered Derek's section. Michael's obviously not here. He worked on Chelsea and basically getting her situated and getting some polish there. He worked on a legacy operator, which you saw earlier, which was Cassandra. She was on the old rig and some older stuff, so he decided to kind of go in and update her. Otherwise, she'd still be on legacy. Like she'd be like really, really old in terms of like the version we have in this old prototype. So he fixed her, and then he was fixing up Chelsea, and then we're waiting until the end of the month, roughly, to basically allocate some funds to basically get some more clothes made for us. So then that way we can start with civilians. So really, he's kind of like polishing up and doing the elements he can do till the end of the month, so he can segue over to the civilians like we talked about in the last podcast when he was here. And then he'll start showing the civilian assets and the dynamic civilian assets and the new infected models. And he'll just be going balls to the wall crazy on that. That's it for that. Did you guys want to jump to Chris now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's move over to Chris. And so, Chris, what have you been working on lately?
Well, this will be pretty short. We just started the next novel this week. Got 2 chapters done, but they're about 10,000 words total, so they're kind of long chapters. Average chapters are around 2,500. Hold on one second.
And that by his wife or Khaleesi. One of the two.
I don't know.
That's all right.
All the way.
She's probably burning down the house.
While we wait. Assuming...
She's seeing fire.
Yeah, I'm like, if he's a few minutes, we might as well.
Yeah. But
I one thing I like Oh, sorry. Who wants to?
No, you go. Go on.
All right. I've been incredibly excited. I spoke to Robert a little while back, earlier this week, and we were talking about. And he just pulled me in. He was like, "Hey, look, we're thinking about rebuilding a lot of the game," and I was like, "Oh, thank God!"
I was so surprised.
I was like, "Yeah," I was like, I didn't want to say anything, but it's been like the jank has just been the spaghetti code has been absolutely getting to the game for a little while, and I think it's really great that we're able to come back and essentially revisit all of the issues and have everything neater and more customizable in the future. And personally, right, I don't know about you guys, but so many of my friends just aren't RTS players, right? And the operator mode and having operator be more than just a gimmick is so fantastic, because even my friends who aren't really, they don't really enjoy RTSs aside as, every now and then, they can jump in, they can run around, shoot zombies, I can airstrike them by accident, laugh at them. It's just
Jesus.
like,
Pain.
it's such a brilliant, like, having this expanded thing for essentially more player inclusion for people. Because I mean, RTS it's a niche genre, right? It's not this isn't the 90s anymore. RTSs are not a very expansive genre anymore, and
Get on
Cepheus
my bad
Protocol
side,
it's so brilliant, and having more accessibility for more players is I think it's a really fantastic thing. Welcome back.
Was Khaleesi
Welcome
burning your
back,
house down?
Chris.
Yeah.
Khaleesi's not even here. My wife is yelling at her, and she's not even here.
Okay.
Yelling at
Right.
phantoms in the walls.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What were you saying,
phantoms.
Chris, before you got interrupted?
Oh, I mean, just going back to my stuff, like I said, it's 2 chapters done, 10,000 words. Yeah, moving on to probably the next couple this week. A little bit in a stuck point. Sometimes the earliest parts of books are always like more annoying for me to get through, but I have my tools to get through it. That's really it for me this week. It's not too much beyond just working on that.
Right on. Okay, so there was our winner. I don't know. Was there anything else? Would you guys want to talk about like when you guys joined the channel and I was like pitching it to you guys to kind of get some like feedback before I announced it publicly?
I was a little terrified, to be honest, when you said it. I was like,
Yeah.
like I love this, but
Yeah.
is everyone else going to? Did you talk about the support for a
do you
melee
mean?
system that we're getting? You said Cepheus Protocol, the operator, supports melee.
Oh yeah,
there
there's
was
a
a
knife.
knife in
So
that
you
image.
had a dedicated melee weapon. So we were going on. Yeah, so we were going.
Yeah, I remember you saying that the
Yeah, the melee,
infected as
the
well
infected
can
will
now,
have
like, have
clubs
clubs and
and
shit.
bats and knives or whatever, and they'll have different damage tables that affect the RTS and the TPS thing. So that way you can shoot the disarm, and your units can shoot the disarm as well. But you figure it'll be just based off of like when you play, like because like some will have them, some don't, and now crawlers can be made by you. So if you shoot someone in the leg and you break their legs, then essentially they'll just start crawling at you, essentially. So that was one of the other changes that we did. Yeah.
Even more ways. Yeah, even more ways.
But they
Take
start a
something
bleed out
by
timer,
surprise.
so that's the fun part. So if you just run away and you blow someone's leg off or blow their leg arm off or whatever, they'll bleed out within 15 seconds. Is the idea? So they keep losing health basically because they're still a human being at the end of the day. They still need that to function. So that was the general idea that we kind of like pushed there. But yeah, like it was. Yeah, go.
Something.
So like
Sorry,
this
continue with
was
that.
a long time coming is what I feel like, as we were trying to salvage it in Q4 of last year, and then it was basically like I kept running into roadblocks, and then even the programmer that wrote most of it was kind of like, this is unyieldly, like even I have troubles working with this code base, and I was like, okay, let's salvage it. We tried to salvage it last quarter, and we were like, this is not working. Like even going in this first week, it's not working. So it was one of those things where it was like you'd constantly be running into like the good example is the Rust example, where you would go into one system and that one system would be tied into 5 systems that have no responsibility and no reason talking to that. So then that way, changing one thing ended up changing 5 things. And then when you did that, it was a ripple effect for bugs. So it was basically one of those things where it was like, from an engineering standpoint, as the game changed and more systems were implemented, it became a little more unwieldy in terms of like the division of responsibilities is the example that I can give there. And it was like we need more intentionality in our design, and we need to basically have more management systems that basically like in some cases also floodgate systems, and so that way they have to ask for approval to like place down a structure, so that kind of shit. So like if there's like 10 civilian groups building, all 10 don't build on the same millisecond. It sends it into a system in the game state, and the game state is like, you go here, wait 5 seconds, or wait a second, you go now. 3 seconds from now you can go, you can build that wall that you've wanted to build across the map that no one even knows exists. The player doesn't know it exists. So there's no priority of building that as if like the player's going to be at their gates, like sieging them in like a second. That's not possible. So it's having like priority systems that also take into consideration that, but also taking in the proximity to a player, like that kind of layer. And those kind of layered systems are easy to do, but trying to like usurp the current system and then insert them into that is just unwieldy. So it was like, doing that and then doing the co-op support makes it so where it's just like we can get it right the first time and get better content to you guys quicker in the future. And it was scary. I mean, you figure it was one of those things where it was just kind of like I think I pulled Chris and Michael into a room first, and we were like, this is pissing me off. Like I can't do anything to the pace that I need to. Like I can't implement systems without fighting 5 other systems or whatever. And we molded over for a couple. I think we were in that room for like 4 hours. And then we started bringing in people like our moderators, Duravar and Winter, just to kind of get a sense of like, what do you guys think about this idea? And you figure, and I just kind of like preached to them. And then I DM'd some people as well. And I was like, what do you think about this? And it was to the point where it was just kind of like, shit, a lot more people were for this than I fucking thought. I mean, I put the Steam post up the other day, and it was like 100% approval rating. We sometimes get at least one person that downvotes every Steam news post. And it was the only one where it literally had like hundreds of upvotes, 0 downvotes, and 1 comment saying like, I'm just here to fucking wish you guys on, like good have at thee. And I was like, oh well, shit. Seems like everyone has the same sentiment. But they like if it hurts us in the short term of like taking this time to clean up the process, the game, the gameplay and all the systems, but in the long term we benefit. It's a long-term investment over short-term gains. Is the best way you can explain it. Because we could keep duct taping systems on and keep adding on features and maybe add in some mishmash co-op, but it would never be a system that was easy to add on and improve, and it would always be like things would take longer than they should to implement and do. So it was one of those decisions where like we see Cepheus as kind of like a long-term engagement kind of game, where it's like we're not one and done. It's like Solaris, Crusader Kings, where it's like the idea is like we see this as like a 5 to 10 year engagement. So to have like Rust has been around for almost a decade, longer than a decade at this point, and it's basically it's basically having it in hindsight, understanding where you are, where you need to go, and then being like, oh, we did fuck up. We need to fix this. We need to fix this quickly. So you figure, yeah, but like you figure it's gonna get done. I mean, you figure we've already gotten more done in 3 days than we got probably done in half a year when we prototyped this in 2017, because we know the engine. We know how to do things correctly now. We know the order of operations. Like it's like when I built that CPO prototype that you saw with like the arcade and the horde mode. And there was another mode I didn't show you guys. It's top secret. And that took me and Michael 2 weeks on our off time, just building that. after all the stuff that we'd learned from Cepheus, we were like, let's prototype TPS in a separate project with no constraints, no limitations, and let's go ham. And that was like 2 weeks of just no lifing it to prototype it out. And then we were like, damn, this is actually really good. What the hell? So it's one of those things where it's like not having those constraints and those floodgates, whatever you want to call them, and being able to just go at it from a clean standpoint, I think benefits us greatly. And I know it can be kind of scary of like, oh, we're starting over, we're deleting everything, but you got to take into consideration when it comes down to it is we have the chart, we have like the pseudocode from the other prototype. We know generally like what we did, how we did it, and what people want. So now we can re-implement it using that pseudocode as inspiration, as an idea, but do it better this time, if that makes any sense. It's like building your first house versus building your 100th house. How you would do it is completely different, and the shortcuts that you can take that actually improve the quality and allow you to do things and build something that lasts, kind of deal. So that's the closest comparison I would make there in terms of like kind of like reaffirming and just kind of trying to like make people understand like this is for the best of the project, and just like making people understand like, I guess you could say, comforting them in terms of like why we're doing it, kind of deal. Is there anything you three want to add to this?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll fill another 10 minutes with just some chatting, and then that'll be our halfway point, and we can take some questions. But yeah, I mean, I remember I was following along with development, especially talking about spaghetti code, where I remember every time you'd add something new, it felt like there was a longer period where you'd be like, why is this crashing? Why is this so difficult to get working? And it was just like, every time you'd add something new, it would slow development down just that little bit more. And yeah, I mentioned to you that I think it was around when civilian evacuation got the big overhaul, where Terminal actually was we were all doing these big chats, and everyone wanted to flesh out the hell out of that system, right? And I think it was around then that it started to feel like, and the ambient civilians in the streets, where it was like the game started to feel slower, and it started to feel a little like I was noticing the jank more, and it felt like it was getting worse rather than better. And there's so many early access games where they just try to keep building on, a system that they're struggling with, and it ends up killing the game in the long run. And I think that, as you said, the the Rust approach, where being able to retackle all of these issues, and especially revisiting older systems that needed work, like you were showing me on the last podcast, we were looking at Chelsea and the like jumping around on helicopters system that was responsible for a lot of Chelsea's AI breaking. So being able to go back, being able to rebuild a lot of these things, and I'll be honest, when we were talking about co-op, and it was like, I was like, my game bugs out like when I'm the only one looking at the infected, right? How's it going to do when there's two people like in separate areas of the city, and what's the AI going to do? And it's like, revisiting these things is just, I think it was such an excellent step to take. And
I agree.
It's really exciting.
Let's get two Aussies. Yeah.
Yeah, the two Australians. Yeah. We're the only ones qualifying. To give opinions because we're Australian.
Yeah. Yes, I like this idea. The only
okay.
I think the biggest thing for me is taking everything apart and putting it back together is probably the best way of going about it. Like Winter said, a lot of games have sort of gone down a lot of different paths and failed miserably. Like there's a few games I know that have decided to take the game apart, but then have done nothing with it. You know, they take a game apart, redo it, and then they don't actually talk to the community. They don't get the community's opinion. They don't get feedback. They just take it apart, release it, and the game flops. Yeah, and I think that's the best part about what you guys are doing is you're taking it apart and you're talking with the community. You know, you're communicating with everyone. You're sort of step by step going through the process, and that for me is probably the best thing. You know, and for one thing, the new melee system, I'm personally very excited for that
You want to
because
just you want to smack heads.
yeah, I want to stab some zombies with a knife. Um, but something else for me is I love Resident Evil, and I love the fact that you're adding a mechanic that allows us to disarm the infected when shooting at their hand. That for me was a staple of Resident Evil. That was, especially Resident Evil 4. I love that game, especially the remake. I played that game for hours.
Fiend that game.
And I remember I remember sitting in a room with you, and you were playing through the game, and every time you would struggle on a puzzle, you would literally just say, "Google this for me."
You were Hunnigan. You were Hunnigan.
So
I was like, Hunnigan,
I
look
was
this up
Hunnigan,
for me.
yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing.
And that's the best part is like you literally like the funniest part is you called me Hunnigan. I was like, "Who the hell is that?" Because I had never played Resident Evil 4 before, and then I played the remake, and then I understood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, that's where he's getting this from.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Lord.
And I think for what I was going to say earlier with the bleed out system when you shoot off a zombie's on an infected's leg, right? It reminds me a lot of Kenshi. Right? Kenshi has a system where if you sever an enemy's limb, they can bleed out. And I think for me that's in that game was awesome. I loved that mechanic. It was just so good. It added a risk factor to each combat scenario. So you would get your character or your group of characters go into a fight, and you would think, okay, well, is this person going to risk losing a limb, an arm, a leg, their head? And it was like, do I have enough medical items to help them recover? Do I have enough money to get a prosthetic and things like that? And when it comes to adding a bleed out system to the zombies, it makes it so going into a horde, if you blow off limbs, you've then got crawlers to worry about. They're not going to stop. They're not going to falter. But it then adds like, okay, well, I've blown off these limbs. My guys are running low on ammo. Retreat them out, and these zombies will just eventually bleed out. And I think that's really good, personally.
Sorry, I'm answering a few questions in the chat. Do we want to move to actually taking some questions? It's like 5 minutes early, but I'm sure we'll be all right. Is anyone going to die if we're 5 minutes early on a Q&A section?
Anything else that Chris you want to add to your perspective of things before we start the Q&A?
No, I'm just glad I'm not there. I don't deal with it all.
You're gonna go pour a drink. Damn.
We've already got.
Oh, there's
some
really
good
good questions in the chat on Discord.
For you. Yeah, I was like, you're gonna love these. Enjoy.
Yeah,
some of these I can't answer.
I love that. Okay, so I mean, just to kind of hit upon both of your points, Derivar and Winter, like that was the idea for, I'll start on Winter's side, is basically just kind of cleaning house and just making it easier to work with, but at the same time implementing co-op from a foundational standpoint. Because again, if we did the cleanup, if we had originally planned for like this quarter, we'd end up doing it again in a pretty actually moderate way just to implement co-op. So at that point, why not just rip off the Band-Aid? Potentially, maybe worst case, spend a little bit more time. But I mean, it's what the people want. I mean, the poll is clear in terms of what's winning in terms of like priorities for the community. Is they want us to fix the polish, the optimization, the jank. But at the same time, from a fundamental level, they want co-op. I mean, you get people joining our Discord almost every day asking for it. You get people on Steam and on Reddit and on everywhere just commenting on it. Almost every day someone's mentioning co-op. So it's one of those things that from our standpoint, from developers, it's clear what people want. And it's also clear that why not just do it now? Because again, it's the idea that we have to do it again. We'd have to just refactor the entire code base when we get the co-op in the future now. So it makes no sense to put it off if we're doing this much of a retrofit. And on top of that, when we implement the systems, like the doctrines, like the DNA research, we're not going to do them with the old implementation. We're going to do them with the new implementation. So that way there's not back and forth. So like I mentioned, this month with some bleed over going into January is foundations and circ. And like towards the end, when we get to like based off of my short list before we start the Q&A, like we have the perception system during the scene list, the ability system changes during the UI, which is the command tree, the income system via the sock and kills. Then there's a resupply component that we were working on. Then there's the mini map, and then there's the money system that we were also researching. That's similar to Total War, how they do it, so it's more robust and easier to work with new currencies in the game. And then at that point, it would be basically doing the DNA research and the doctrines. And we'll probably do the doctrines first because it's the most complicated, implement the airstrikes. And when we do it, we'll replicate it and do it from a standpoint of just doing what we have previously. And sorry, not previously, but basically taking what we had previously, improving it, and then doing the new doctrines. So then that way, at the end of this 3-month tenure, we're attempting to get caught up in what we've screwed up, or the delays. And we're not implementing the old version of doctrines, which would then cause us to make it take even longer to implement the revised doctrines, which again, I'm talking about the chart that was in our end of the year review on the Steam store page. If you go to it, there's a post there that basically has like a flow chart of all the doctrine upgrades, the passive upgrades, the new structures, the abilities, the units, and they're just sitting in a repo. They're just sitting in our content browser on the Unreal Engine waiting for programmers to touch them. And it's one of those things where it's like we just need to rip off the Band-Aid. And again, my emphasis is that we don't work on the doctrines and the DNA until we fix systemic issues of like the pathfinding and the formations and all that. So if we get to a point in a week or two and there's still some foundational issues that people are seeing when they're playing the build that we'll put out on experimental and a special beta, then we'll spend another week or two fixing them, and then we'll work on the doctrines and the DNA, because we don't want to recreate the same problems in terms of like trying to do too much and then failing, kind of deal. Where it's like we need to kind of finish the systems and the core systems that we've started on, get them to a point where they're done, and then move on. So it's one of those things where it's like that also comes into my new approval process for every mechanic and system going into this retrofit. So there's a lot of like refactors and changes that we have going into this to make sure that we don't retread the same issues. And then the counter derivar side, before we open up for Q&A and questions from YouTube, the Steam store page, and on Discord, is basically it's from a standpoint of like I played Resident Evil 4 and I played a bunch of other zombie games, and I was thinking to myself, like, how do we give the infected a little bit more veracity and tool set and something, tool set? And I was playing Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I was like, why don't the infected have melee weapons? Like they're people that are just being controlled by a hive mind. They would use anything that's available to them, kind of deal. So it was one of those things where we're like, well, why don't we prototype that in CPO? And we did, and it worked out great, and it was fun, and it was a fun mechanic, not just for like what'll come to the RTS side, but also on the TPS. Because then we're like, oh, that guy has axes or like, a hammer, so I know the damage is going to be, instead of 5 or 10, it'll be 15 or 20. So then that way combat becomes a little bit more like intricate. Because then you actually have to plan a little bit more in terms of like, oh, I have to it's not just the blow up guys or the spitters. It's also like, do those guys have melee weapons? What's their range? Who do I need to target first? Kind of deal. Do I need to pause the game and evaluate things? Like that kind of situation. And it's those meaningful moments where it's like you actually have to take the moment to plan and replan and be adaptable is where the game shines. Where it's like you don't always know what you're going to run into. You don't always know what's going on. I mean, sure, you have the scout drone to a certain point, but because of Chelsea's, I guess you could say, like reaction time in terms of being able to build and output units pretty rapidly, some of the times you have to basically just be reactionary in terms of like, oh, I need to retreat, I need to bring in airstrikes, I need to have my mortars lay down cover fire or my units retreat, like those kind of meaningful decisions where it's like it's gonna be a heave and ho, a constant push and tug of war basically. And that's I think is why the game like shines and just really kind of like stands on its own in terms of like just those moments. Okay, so then that I think concludes it, and the moderators can now move over to the Q&A section.
Yeah, we can take some questions. Let's focus on questions around some of the aspects that the rebuild will entail.
Really
I
good
know
ones.
there were some really good ones before that I didn't.
Well, I asked them to
write
save
down.
it and type it again.
And also, yeah. If you've got questions around the coding side and what a lot of the rebuilding will entail, please post those now. I'll also start marking down some.
I'm going to take Tao's
about
question.
Co-op plans.
So Tao MCRAN asked, aspiring game dev here, what major issues is the team concerned with regarding replication? I understand there's all the rewriting of code, but what other hurdles are you not looking forward to? Desynchronization, hacking, and I mean the biggest thing is like you figure when you write a game and you write it for single player, there are certain ways that you do your UI. There are certain ways that you do certain systems. But when you write it for co-op, you have to write it in a completely different flow because you're now splicing your code up and choosing what gets sent to all clients, what gets sent to the server, what doesn't get sent. And then what level do you send that data? Do you send it as a reliable call, which means that it has to arrive, but those calls are for like taking damage, mission critical things? Or do you send it as a non-reliable, which means that it's like a particle effect spawning? It's like visual stuff that don't affect gameplay. So if your internet is having lag or latency, it can get dropped. Reliable calls are supposed to always arrive, but they can cause lag and a bunch of other things. Unreliable calls are like, it doesn't really matter if it reaches the target, and it's basically that cost of doing business of basically having a multiplayer game. Every game you ever play has reliable and unreliable calls, and you just can't tell because you're not on the other person's computer looking at every frame of every second, comparing and contrasting that particle effect didn't spawn. Oh, my internet just had a latency spike, so it didn't receive to my computer, but it received to the other 7 clients that are in our session. So it's basically prototyping and QAing that and figuring out a balance versus reliable versus unreliable and so on and so forth, and just refactoring the code. Because when I get off this podcast, I'm going to rewrite the entire def system that you saw, fix that crash you saw, and then test it for co-op, and then I'll do a ping tonight showing my results. So after this, I'm going downstairs to get coffee, and then I'm immediately punching in my 8 hours. We'll see how long I go today. So you figure, there's a lot of layers, but it's fun. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like when you're doing it, it's like not having those limitations of like that was systemically built in Cepheus is really fun because you can get things done pretty quickly and you're building it up from a foundation, understanding and knowing what to do and what not to do now. So you're in a box, but you understand where the extents and limits of that box now versus what it was previously where it was like, there is no box, kind of deal. So it's like, it's that understanding and being able to take the right steps now in the right order to execute. Like, I mean, everything you saw for the co-op and the formation was done in 2 or 3 days this week. So you figure like, I gave up and we ripped the whole code base out Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday was everything that I showed today for co-op and formations. So 3 days, and I programmed the formation system with co-op support, the movement system with co-op support, and taking damage and hit reactions with co-op support. So what am I going to have next week? It's going to be rapid mobilization of like I'm putting in 12-hour days if I have to from the project lead standpoint to get it done. Next question, boys. What else you guys got for me? Winter and Duravar.
I've got. Do you want to answer some like questions on your plans for how co-op is going to work,
Anything you want.
or would you rather stick
I'll
to
answer
code for
any
now?
and all questions.
Okay. It's a good question because I found myself wondering myself. Our feed the need 3 says he has a question about how co-op works. So in terms of faction control and for the future when playable infected or Fenrir, are you planning to have each? I'm going to rephrase your question a little bit. Sorry, just because I know what you're getting at, but I think so. Are you planning to purely have each faction on the map be like a constant, and players will take control of that faction? So, for example, you've got CERC on the map, and then you play as them, and up to 4 players can co-op, or do you plan a Company of Heroes style, as he puts it, where each player can control essentially a copy of a faction? So like one person can play as CERC, and then another person can also play as CERC, but as a separate, a separate entity.
Okay, so
he's thinking about like in the future when PvP kind of multiple players.
So as it stands right now, our primary 100%, 110 of our priority is the co-op and the Circ side of co-op. We've talked. Me and Chris and Michael sat in the room early this week, and we also were talking about that. And we were concerned that if we added in the ability to push for infected playable now, it's conceivably doable, but it would double our links for everything, our entire timeline. So we were like, let's keep versus multiplayer speculative. Let's keep that to where like it's something that we're thinking about, but we don't have the time and the resources to do it at this time. I don't even have an ETA on that. When it comes down to like our early access release, it's the co-op and it's the Circ playable from that standpoint. And it's more of like Halo Wars or Stellaris co-op is a good example, where you're all sharing the Circ faction and the host is the game master and he chooses what's allowed and what's not allowed. So you would basically join someone else's session. You can bring in your operators. And the idea is that like you're all working together on a front to push an initiative or to push a play style, or maybe you're all assholes and you're all just doing whatever you want. And those guys are playing as Umbrella and those guys are playing as nice guys, but obviously that won't clash that well because then they'll affect each other negatively in terms of the civilian reputation ticks. But it's one of those things where that is our initial goal, is to implement that and keep it more manageable and realistic. If something changes for being able to push versus or more of like that faction versus this faction versus this faction, that would, if we were to do that, and if we do that, it would be infected versus Circ versus Fenrir, where it'd be a 3-way fight. Right now, everyone outside of Circ is going to be controlled by an AI or some kind of virtualization system. If we can get to that point, conceivably resource-wise, then I'll reevaluate it. But for right now, what we have already is enough there to keep us busy easily for a year. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. And it's one of those things where it's like, for our team, I mean, even what was the new RTS game that came out that was on the Unreal Engine that came out on Steam? It was early access. Stormgate? Yeah, they were veterans of RTS, and they probably had like 2 programmers to make that game. We have like one and a half programmers because I do admin. So you figure it's one of those things where like it took them a couple years to make that prototype, and that game was in early access. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew. We need to keep it based off of the tool set and the limitations that we've already established. And then if we can, and doors open to us a year, 2 years down the road, we'll look into it. But I'm not going to make any guarantees for versus at this point, knowing basically what's involved. Back to you, Leonard.
So just as a high level overview, essentially the factions are constants, right? You're not going to have company of heroes with small map spawns and stuff. It's Cirque is always on the map, the infected are always on the map, and
Yes.
Fenrir will always be on the map as parts of the world rather than
you can still
jigsaw
turn them
pieces
off in
that
the
you can
custom
just
game
plug in.
settings, though. Like the infected.
Yeah,
the infected you can't turn them
in a
off because the
sense,
entire game is built
won't
around them. But you get what I mean.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
just Sims at that point. You just
Yeah.
I was also typing up a little answer for do you want to take Joker's question actually about why I know we've gone over a lot of why the rebuild is an important thing, but Joker's been talking about how he or she, look at me, I'm just assuming genders.
Shame on you.
I know. Doesn't understand why. I'll take the last comment. I was typing up an answer, but
Where is it?
I'll let you take it if you like. I can't understand why, even if all people want co-op, the devs focus on it, because they know that the other aspects need much more work for co-op to work. I was about to answer, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was about to say that a lot of these systems, like working on the other systems now, like doctrines or airstrikes, if they're not put together for multiplayer at the beginning, it's much more work to go back and make them work for multiplayer the other way around. It's so many indie games get tanked because they build a really excellent system that works in single player, right? So, for example, doctrines. I mean, I'm trying to think of like.
Give you an example. They were billions.
Having a doctrine synchronized. Yeah, having it sync between players is like on. It sounds like it's not too difficult. Yeah, one player presses button. It works for both. But there's so much that goes into it, and it's much easier to do it the other way around, where you build it from the ground up to support multiplayer, because otherwise, even games like Command and Conquer, where you'd have desync issues and you'd have to reload the game for both players. Stellaris has struggles with it, I know, a lot.
Oh yeah, Stellaris is bad for that. Yeah.
Where it's much better for the team to do the co-op work first and build the systems alongside it, rather than trying
Shoehorn it
to
in.
get building a new system like civilian evac, right? Doing civilian evac in single player has been a struggle, right? With getting the game to run well with all of the people running around. Trying to then get that to work in multiplayer, like if one player is on one side of the map looking at a pile of civilians and another player is on another side of the map looking at a pile of infected, it just slows everything down insanely. So rebuilding these things now, so that, especially for performance reasons, is I would say one of the biggest reasons is performance reasons, because you're no longer having one camera, you're having two cameras, and you need to be able to support essentially the scale of having multiple players.
So, just kind of give more
on the map.
details there, is that when it comes to the Fog of War, we de-virtualize units and turn them into like Total War commander units, and then we can virtualize them, de-virtualize them. So when you're in Fog of War, we virtualize them, and then when you start to get closer, we de-virtualize them, and then we fake where they've moved or what they've done, and then armies will basically like do stat checks and kill each other behind the scenes, so that way the world's going on as a whole. Now, doing it from a fundamental standpoint means that all of that supports replication right off the bat, but also making it to where even if player B is over there in Narnia, if they don't have line of sight, it doesn't matter. Those systems are still virtualized. Even if their camera is hovering over an area where there's nothing conceptually going on, it's still virtualized, and we're faking sound effects and we're doing a bunch of stuff there to make it to where it doesn't take away from what matters, which is the core gameplay across the world somewhere else. Because if you were spawning and trying to keep all those systems in play, it's not tenable, it's not technically possible anymore once you get to a certain density of map and a density of units. So, and to kind of hit on Joha's point about like focusing on the co-op versus fixing what's there is we're not moving on till the core level is fixed. We're not making the same problem that we made previously. So it's about basically fixing the systemic issues that Joha and other people have astutely brought up over the years, and then implementing that in a implementing co-op when, as we build that, as we fix it, and then moving on to the next system. So then that way everyone gets what they're looking for. People that have been, we've talked about co-op since 2020, 2021, they get what they're looking for. The people that want the systemic game fixed and the bugs and the performance improved, they get what they're looking for. We need to take every system from a foundational standpoint, audit them, fix them, and replicate them, and then move on. And that's what the whole point of January is to basically take those systems, fix them to the level they need to be fixed, like the improvements I made to the player camera, the improvements I made to the follow camera. They're better than what they were in Cepheus by light years. And then doing improvements to the formation system, the pathfinding for them, replicating that, playtesting that, move on to the next system, which would be the fog of war, that different programmers are working on different things. So I have my subdivision of tasks, Derek has his subdivision of tasks, and then we're both vetting and checking everything from each other's work. And then at that point, and ideally in the next couple of days to within a week, I'll put a build out. And then you can play test it. And then you could be like, oh, this works really nicely. This is bad. I don't like this. Blah, blah, blah. And then from there, we alliterate and fix before we move on. So I know a big thing from a lot of the community was the building, the engineers, the points the engineers moved to, the attack points that infected moved to for buildings. That's why there's an entire month dedicated to civilians, March, which is basically civilian month, which a vast majority of civilian month is the ambient civilians, the civilian evac, and making sure all those systems work and applying more attention to details of those systems, rewriting some systems so they work a little more inoperably with other systems, and then adding that replication support as the final layer of code, basically the pane of code, basically. So that's the idea. Another example is the infected, is going back to them and having and basically reworking their AI so they focus more on the circ and less on the infected. So you get to see those larger numbers within the limitations of there could be roughly around 200 infected, 300 infected, if we can spawn the confines of the game. But those need to be stress tested with the replication. So that way we can figure out how much higher we can go now rather than later. So then that way we can know okay, we're going to have to just improve their AI, make these kind of changes, do this, just to make sure everything fits within the confines of what we established, to hit back on what Winter was saying. Because I've had growing concerns in terms of basically certain systems that you do can get to a level in single player where they're untenable to do in a co-op or multiplayer experience. I mean, look at They Are Billions as an example, where they have so many units in their game that they could never figure out a way of adding co-op. And that was something that was if you go to their forums, people are always they're asking that. And it was I don't want to get to that point per se. So it's on the outside looking in of okay, we need to implement this so we have our limitations and we have our box understood from that remaining aspect of gameplay. And at the same time, doing the replication allows us to figure out how we can optimize the movement component in a way that's not going to compromise the performance of their movement. Because I mentioned this previously, is the most expensive aspects of gameplay in a game, or in our game, let me not generalize it, is the perception, hearing and seeing, pathfinding, their movement, so their movement components, and because it's physics calculation and all that. So those are right now the three most expensive aspects. Rendering, your video card sleeps on Cepheus protocol. Unless you have a low-end video card that's low, medium spec, or a Steam Deck, then you're starting to be GPU limited. But we're CPU hogs. We eat that shit like it's a fat kid at a candy shop. So it's one of those things where pushing this is also pushing that initiative. But let me add one more layer to that, just so you can give them more nuance to this answer, is that replication adds an overhead to the CPU. Replication is handled on the CPU thread, so we have to balance the replication with the gameplay, and make sure that we're not taking away too many resources till we're choking out the replication on your CPU. So doing it now is in our best interest. And like again, if we were to put it off and do what you're suggesting, where we just do only non-replicated gameplay, when we implement the co-op, like in 2 quarters from now, give or take, we would have to end up retrofitting and creating new bugs and new issues that you would have already reported or didn't exist previously, because we had to reshift and move around code, and it creates new permutations, new things that can go wrong. So it's another reason why it's like, why wouldn't we just tear it all down and fix it from the beginning? Because that way, when you get these bugs that are going to come from the new experimental, we fix them that one time and it's done. And there's not a major code repurposing that has to happen 2 quarters from now, a quarter from now, that's going to introduce the same bugs or new bugs. So it's about that. Because again, like what you're saying would make perfect sense if we weren't going to re-tear out the code base. Like if we were just doing what we originally planned, we would not want to do co-op at this time, because it'd be too much of an undertaking to port the current like legacy code. But there's nothing holding us back now, so why not? Anyhow, next question from Winter and Duravar.
Next question.
I'm gonna drink a soda.
I love Tam Cram.
He's hitting us with the
Tam
1-2
Cram here is,
punches.
like asking some of these like like the actual like code questions where I'm like, cool.
Well, no, and Joker's question's good too, because like again, like I love it.
Oh no, yeah, no, Joker's
we want
great. I'm
people
glad we
that are
went
coming
into
in that are
I was
saying,
typing up an answer, and I was like,
we want people that are coming in that are saying like, I don't understand, why are you doing this? Like this is stupid, blah blah blah. So we can have a conversation.
It's brilliant.
Instead of like,
I was just saying like Tam Cram is here like, yeah, code question. I'm like, cool, I can't answer this. Duck.
Okay.
As far as the coding is concerned for Cepheus Protocol, do you utilize blueprints, C++, or a healthy balance?
95% is in C++, and then 5 give or take, like 5 to 10% is roughly in blueprints. Like it's roughly around that number. With this shift to co-op and this cleanup, it's going to become 98 to 99% C++. And a lot more systems that, how do I word this? The leniency that we would give for some people to basically like do very abstract, like different things in every variation or permutation of certain vehicles or things need to be nailed down and drummed down into a streamlined process that is authored from the C++ high level, instead of having too many overrides and too many unique aspects in the blueprints. Like that's great for prototyping, but when it comes to like replication and standardization and optimization, everything needs to be baked in at the C++ level, so it's easier to profile, analyze, bug fix, and it's always more performant, because blueprint is inherently slower on an individual call basis to just initializing it. And C++ is always going to be faster. That's why they always say that if you have to write in blueprints, you want to basically write your most extensive, complicated, like mathematically intensive code in C++, and then call that from blueprints as a trade-off. We don't even use behavior trees. All of our C++, all of our AI is written in C++, like Fear back in the day, where it's a state machine. And basically, like, it just goes off of that. I know a lot of games like Halo use behavior trees, but that doesn't work at scale. Once you get above 50 AI, 100 AI, you have a problem when it comes to like their tick rates and other contributing attributes where like blueprints calls are inherently slower. So we went for the hyper polished, hyper optimized approach where everything was programmed from a C++ level, and that's going to continue, and that's going to extend going into this next phase of adding co-op support. Because in that way, I'll just do one more example, is like our ability system was written in C++. So like I'm going to be converting our current melee that's in CP to a ability. And by replicating the ability at a low level of like how an ability works in terms of its stages, and having like helper functions or like areas where you can put effects, and fitting abilities or actions that characters can take within the confines of that box, I can make a melee and a fire flare ability just work from a replication standpoint without having to basically go in and essentially like replicate it on a per case basis for every unique permutation of ability. So like that's something that we're pushing for, and that's how, excuse the abbreviation, it's called GAS. It's like goal-oriented programming or whatever. It's what Fortnite uses. Remnant 2 uses it. And it's their equivalent of what we've written, but theirs is too expensive for an RTS game at scale. Again, if we had less than 100 characters like Fortnite, we'd be fine. But the moment you go above that, you have to start creating custom solutions and using their innovations and their progress as inspiration of like, okay, we need to do this, but we need to like take into consideration the limitations of like our unit count and other things, blah, blah, blah. So it's fun. But that just comes with the territory of game design. Everything is research and development. Everything is like figuring out what your box is and then working within the confines of that box to make sure you don't nuke people's computers performance-wise. Back to you guys.
Let me.
Do we have anything on
We have one on
or
YouTube.
Steam?
Oh yeah.
Weasel1891 asks, are there any plans to allow for troop control from third person? Something as basic as pushing a button and having all troops within a certain radius move or attack in that direction would be great. So, excellent question. Yes, there's a short answer. I talked about this briefly in the last podcast in a greater detail. The current experimental, if you possess the operator, you can give orders with the directional keys. It's just not explained very greatly in terms of like the controls. I don't, because again, the priority is the RTS. So January, February, March. And if we are able to hit all that off in perfect cultivation, perfect order, that means we've caught up on the DNA, we've caught up on the doctrines, we've fixed the AI. And then there's going to be some holdouts that bleed over it, going into the summer. So conceptually in February, we would do an inventory and figure out what still needs to be edited or changed. And then if we're at a bucket list where we've accomplished everything and everyone's happy, then I'm going to go in with Derek and we're going to spend a couple of weeks just putting the icing on what you guys saw for the operator. Because that operator you saw on today's broadcast is not done. Me and Michael have at least these are 2 weeks of work that we want to do for the operator. To flesh it out. Add troop control and mirror SWAT 4 or Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, where basically like you can coordinate and do the RTS aspects in the TPS in the TPS module. For when you're in pandemic. I mean, obviously when you're playing in those like arcade or the horde maps or the special operations that I haven't showed off, when you're doing those, it's just confined to like normal you by yourself, or if that mode permits, multiplayer with your friends. But when it comes to like the RTS, it's the control. It's the Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. It's the SWAT 4 level of controls. I mean, that is at the foremost of my list for the operator to ensure he is not a gimmick, and that your friends that come from a standpoint of not liking RTS games like Winter Hit Upon can play it and enjoy it. Where it's like they are an asset to your overall directive in playing in the RTS, where it's like how Winter gave an example where like you have your plens that are playing like in a TPS module, they're on the ground and they're doing like fire teams and they're coordinating AI if they want to do that, or if they're playing by themselves, or if they're playing in fire teams comprised entirely of players and they're doing whatever you've directed them to do, or maybe they're just autonomous and you're like, hey, I don't know what's going on in this district. Why don't you go scout? I'll send some engineers over in 5 to 10 minutes, secure the area, and wait till I show up with my RTS reinforcements. So then your players go out by themselves with their fire teams that they built. They secure, wait for the RTS players to come in, build, rinse and repeat. And that way it kind of gives some nuance and a lot of layers of gameplay that I've never really seen in a video game. Like that level of control doesn't exist as far as I know in a video game, where it's like you have that level of sophistication when it comes to like planning an assault, playing with your teammates, having different perspectives so everyone's happy in terms of you got your third person shooters, your RTS players, and then your hybrids, because you can jump back and forth. And we're aiming for 4 players initially. And then if the technology allows, if I can get it higher, then I'll double the amount of operators that you can have in your session. I won't know that until we get everyone in at the end of March, and we have a play test, a public one, on the experimental. And I just start gathering the performance feedback and the data, and we'll have some builds where we double the number, and then have you guys play for a weekend, or have you guys play for a week, and then give us the data of like, hey, like the system falls apart because there's too many players everywhere and the AI can't keep up, and then we'd look at the technical limitations of like, can we counter this, or are we pushing the engine too hard, kind of deal. So it's going to be very interesting in terms of like when we get to that point, because again, I have a plan in my head, but again, it comes down to the limitations of technology in terms of like how far I want to push these systems. Yeah, no, I fucking can't wait. I mean, figure this is what keeps me up at night. This is what I think about when I'm watching movies or playing other games, or it's like I'm watching Walking Dead, or I'm watching Fear the Walking Dead or whatever, and I'm just like, this would be so amazing if we had this in Cepheus right now. Because like I jump on the public Discord and bump people to play the game with me. Or like when me and Michael can't figure out a co-op game to play that night, why don't we just go play co-op on Cepheus and just fiend that? I want a game that I can play religiously all the fucking time. You know what I mean? For co-op and for non-co-op. And it's about getting Cepheus to that point.
I have a feeling.
Oh, you're screwed.
Yeah,
You're screwed.
I feel like you want to play Cepheus? No, I don't own it.
Yeah. I don't have Cepheus anymore, bro. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have it.
I don't. Yeah, I got no idea what you're talking about. Not a clue. It's like I could see you playing it.
You're
right
lying.
Now.
I see you. You're hiding in chat offline mode. But yeah, no. So you think it's a long time coming, and these next 3 months are going to be hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be the hardest time of our lives when it comes to a development standpoint, when it comes to the stress and everything else. But it is what it is. You know what I mean? It's what you sign up for when you're doing a game dev. It's what you sign up for when you have a roadmap and there are expectations from your community. Get it done. You know what I mean? Kind of deal. So, yeah. It's gonna be, I mean, I think it's gonna be fun. Or maybe I'm crazy, but I can't wait to jump in after this podcast and start programming. Because then it's like I can get shit done quickly now. Yeah. Like I don't have the same limiters that I had. So
it's an adventure. Yeah. It's a trip.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is I love the unknown. And I love just basically trying new things when it comes to programming and experimentation. So to me, the unknowing is not daunting. The unknown is like, fuck, let's go. Here's my backpack. Let's go. Let's jump right in. I don't know what's on the other side. Let's do it right now. So you figure it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't really faze me. I'm ready for it. It's fun. I got my coffee. I got my dog. They entertain me. I'm ready to go. So you figure, what?
Made a bug.
Oh yeah, and then I bugged Durvar and Chris and Michael and everyone, everyone of like bouncing ideas off of them on the Discord, because I'll pull them in at least once every couple of days and be like, rubber ducky method. If you guys don't know what that is, the rubber ducky method is basically when you talk about a problem or an issue with someone else. Sometimes when you do that, you solve the problem yourself. Other times, they'll give you a perspective or a side of things that you didn't think of to reevaluate how you're perceiving the problem to where typically you can fix it. You know, and it's a programming method you typically use, even with non-programmers. It's perfect. But yeah, it's fun.
I think the funniest part is like some days I'll be just sitting.
You play a game on PlayStation, and I'm like, I need you in the room right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I'll be sitting here playing like Remnant 2 or something like that, and he'll send me a message on Discord. You around?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you have some stories for that. Anything you want to share what you were doing? And I was like, "Could you get on right now? I need to run something by you."
I mean, you did that the other day, but my Discord would not turn on for some reason. Yeah, so it's like I couldn't get on. But I mean, a lot of times he has this tendency of ask me to hop on, and I'm like, I'm sleeping still, but I for some reason, like I can sense his message coming, so I wake up like literally 5 minutes.
Oh Lord, it's like PTSD. I'm gonna go cry.
Yeah, it's like I'm like, I guess it's an excuse to get up. You know, I could sit here in a nice warm bed for another hour, but yeah, let's go see what he wants now. And then sit there, and he always does the whole, I run something by you for like 5 minutes, and then it's
But
like 3
yeah,
hours
we tend to
later.
talk for hours because then it'll be like a short-winded conversation about one topic, and then that'll segue into like 80 billion other things.
Oh God, yeah, I remember that whole. Oh yeah, I just
8
need you
hours
for
later.
5 minutes.
That's an
Literally 4 hours
over-exaggeration, I know.
later.
But we have fun. We're chill, I think. I cry.
We laugh. We have a good time.
But yeah, so it's what. Oh
Yeah, he
yeah,
cries a little
yeah, I do. Rolling on the floor with my
bit.
dog, literally on top of me, trying to lick me to death.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know. So like, you figure, I'm trying to see what else. I mean, yeah. So that's fun. I don't know if you guys have any other funny stories to share. I'll wait for a question to roll in. Let me see.
I pretty much answered it. Pancram was curious if you do, like, if you're planning to just do some streams for like
Programming?
purely like just chilling out and coding. Yeah.
I used to do that, but no one ever came to them, so I gave up. I mean, I could, I guess. I don't know. Like, let me get more stuff done so it's more solidified, because I'm jumping between 1, 2, 3 monitors. So the problem is that you figure, like, you wouldn't be able to see everything. Because, like, I have one monitor open with the old game, and then the code base from there. I have another monitor open up with the current game with that code base, and then I have a third monitor for research and like code examples, documentation from the Epic, Unreal Engine, like that kind of stuff. Or I just have like our like task sheet open of like my goals, and then part of it's on my whiteboard. I'm like a dribble when it comes to programming, so like I'm constantly jumping around. So I don't know how I would stream that. Because I have a whiteboard that I consistently go to every 10 to 15. I just bought it recently, the last month. And I've just been basically putting my dailies on there and then clearing them off. Because again, the biggest thing with game design is not to overwhelm yourself with the big stuff, but to do small, tangible, tiny chunks every day as you bite away at the big overarching goals. So, what did you say?
Yeah, don't know it.
Yeah.
Don't I know it? The first lesson you ever taught me was don't focus on the big
Yeah,
stuff
take the
first.
tiny aspects like the player camera,
then,
the movement, the AI. Like, get the abstract parts working that like are the foundation, and then start patching it together, piecing it together. Like, because you got to get like the AI moving and like dying and all that before you get to the complexity of having an evacuation or an extraction system. So it's like low level to high level and how they all cohesively come together, kind of deal. But let me think about that, Ta, and I'll get back to you on that. If there's enough push for, I know Efren streams. Actually, Efren just ghosted in. Efren, how are you doing from the wildfires?
Doing good. I mean, they shut off our power to.
That's why you
prevent
kept
any
coming
kind
in and
of,
out.
like-
Okay, is your power back on, or are you on a Jenny?
It is now. The Jenny was busted. I spent most of the day yesterday trying to fix it. Finally, kind of found the issue in a way. But
did
the
they
power
tell
came
you if
back
it's going to
on.
be on consistently, or are they going to turn it off again because of the fires?
They sent another warning saying it might be turned off again, but the winds aren't as strong as they were before, so hopefully they don't. Because the winds were like nuts, man. Like, I woke up on like, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday morning, and I had to chase my
from the fire stuff?
Because they got blown away, yeah, and I had to pick up a bunch of trash that got spread because it was trash day, so our cans were out, and
that's
the
crazy.
winds just.
Yeah, because I read about recently, we've had crazy wind
that was
here,
fun.
and it seems like you guys have crazy winds in your neck of the woods as well. And it was just one of those things where I was like, after I read about the fires and knew that you were like in that vicinity, I was like, I'm not expecting anything this week. Like, that's just fucking batshit crazy what's going on in LA.
Well, the closest fire to us is like
close
maybe
enough.
20 miles away.
That's close
But
enough.
we had our
yeah.
We had our fires like last month or 2 months ago during October. That's when we had the big bear
It's one
fire.
of those things where it's like, I'm not even, again, like I told you on your reports channel, it is what it is. Just whenever you can get back to working on the photogrammetry stuff, you're welcome. Did you want to talk about that actually before we? I didn't get to mention it. Did you have anything you wanted to share?
I mean, like apart from what I've done so far, it works pretty great. I mean, it's if you're doing like high poly photorealistic stuff, I can see the definite uses. I mean, a lot of the stuff like that we're doing, like for landscapes and doing Alcatraz, it's definitely going to help to kind of model the landscape to scale of what Alcatraz looks like. So it's a perfect reference to have in 3D inside the engine to sculpt the landscape. For props especially, like if you've got like an object at home and you take pictures of it from like around the object, have good lighting, pump it through the machine, and you get a pretty good high poly model that you can work off of. You could either use the photograph as textures or do your own textures and then just do the retopology, and it's got its uses, especially if you're doing a game to scale or any kind of environment to scale. I've yet to bring this into Unreal to kind of see where the scale's at, because I'm not sure exactly how close to scale this is, but it's pretty easy. Like that shot you got right there, I just went into Google Earth, did a 360 shot of Alcatraz, put it into the program, ran it. Within like 4 minutes, bam, there you go. That's what you
and
get.
like it's one of those things where like we're looking into this tech, so then that way when we build because I have like thousands of photos for San Francisco. We Efren, myself, and a previous level designer went to San Francisco. We took thousands of photos. And we took thousands of photos of Alcatraz. At the time, we were using it for inspiration of like how to model and the depth and the perception of the area, so we could kind of understand the geography of the area. But now, because of photogrammetry, like Stalker 2 used it for most of their environments. Example is that they'd go around the province and they just take photos of cars and walls and fences or whatever, and then they would feed it into this program that Epic gives us for free now. And then you could turn it into full, highly detailed models that are one-to-one recreations of the real-world locations. So it's one of those things where, like, we're learning this to essentially make it to where we can build more content quicker. So, like, because again, the whole confines of the game is everything's based off of the real-world version. So with, like, let me just rewind here because people don't, then they're new here on Discord, is that the current map is going in a dumpster can in the next quarter or two, and it's being replaced with a representation of San Francisco that's real. Treasure Island's being changed, Angel Island's being changed. We're adding the Redwoods Forest area, we're adding San Francisco North, we're adding the Golden Gate Bridge, we're adding the Oakland Bay Bridge, and it's going to be a solid box play area. If you want to see what I'm talking about, go on the end of the year poll, the main post that's on Steam, and look at the map that's there. That's the final map. So everything that we're doing here, this learning this technology, is in service of that goal. So then that way, if we determine that we actually need more photos, myself and Efren can sneak over there again, take the photos that we need, and then come back. Because there's a chance that the photos that we took aren't enough, and we actually needed probably even more perspectives of different buildings. Because then instead of a modeler spending weeks to months building out a city, you spend 3 days just taking pictures of every angle of a skyscraper that you know you're going to put in your game. You come home, you load it into the program, it generates the model. You did what would take someone normally like a week to make in a day, if not a couple hours. And then you just spend the time cleaning it up, adding the textures, getting it ready for gameplay, kind of deal. So it's one of those things where we're trying to figure out how to streamline our process to make it where we can give you guys more content. Because again, we need to do more maps long term. Like leaving early access, our goal is just to have San Francisco North and that area we talked about. But long term, we want to look into other provinces like LA, San Diego, Seattle, New York, and so on and so forth. And if we can master this technology, that means we can go to these locations, spend a week taking pictures of everything, probably look like terrorists to get the police called on us. But nonetheless, we can basically do that. Yeah, I know. They'll do that. Yeah. They'll take pictures. If you're taking too many pictures, you'll get the police called on you because they think you're plotting a terrorist attack. Like we kept getting weird looks when me, Efren, and our other level designer went to San Francisco. Like people were looking at us like we're fucking crazy. Like, are they planning something? Yeah, no, and then you had your crazy hair, and it was just kind of like, okay, like, let's just not stay in one area for too long so we don't get the cops called on us. But you figure, It's what.
No, my old studio, we were
Yeah.
doing Wall Street, and we did get the cops caught on us because this is like not too long after 9/11. And so, like, we had our guy who was just out there taking hundreds and hundreds of photos because we were going to reproduce that zone for for our vertical slice. And the cops like, "What are you doing here?" Like, "Oh, we're game designers. We're just taking photos." Well, you need
Well,
to
they
go
will do that.
quickly.
I've never had it called on me, but I assume that once you explain it, they
Yeah.
leave you alone. But it's public property.
I don't know. Like Wall Street was, that's a little different because of the financial sector and it's a terrorist hotspot.
Yeah.
And then being New
I don't
York,
know.
but I mean,
I'll have to
I
look
guess
into
it
the
depends on
legality
where
of
you're
that
at.
and see if you have to get a permit. Because you figure if we end up doing that and they tell us to leave, I'm gonna get mad. It's like goes to City Alphas or something.
We looked into that for the
Yeah, you need a
drones,
permit for
that
drones
do
to
need a
fly in
permit
certain
to use
areas.
them.
I'm just looking into that because you figure I don't want that surprise. If we end up finding out that we need more pictures and we have to go to San Francisco, I'm probably gonna have to contact whatever local council, office, government institution in San Francisco and get approval. Because I still need to talk to the Parks Department for getting. I still need to talk to the National Park Service to see if we can get some more access to certain areas of Alcatraz. Because there are certain areas that we don't know how they look like inside, and we didn't want to make them up. So, like, next time I can go to San Francisco, I need to see if I can schedule a meeting with them for the Park Service to figure that out. Because Alcatraz is ran by the Park Service. But that's a long-term goal. Right now, it's not a mission critical thing, but it's something that I cherry on the top kind of deal. I feel like to wrap up sometime going into the mid-year, the end of the year, when we're trying to launch early access and finish up the last things, is that something that I'll plan for because we need to know that for the campaign, especially. Yeah. Oh. So anyhow, okay. So there's that fun thing, and that kind of segues in what Efren was talking about. So I just wanted to give some context there so people understood why we're looking at the photogrammetry, and that, again, you can see a real-life example of that in the recent Stalker 2 game. Because my understanding is a vast, like 90% of their game is photogrammetry. And I think Blue Drake, his YouTube channel, he was talking about that recently too, where it was like that kind of technology and that kind of AI is going to change game design. Because you figure it's no longer spending weeks and months modeling a vehicle or something. You could give it a picture and it will create it for you. And UV it and texture it for you in some cases. So those are all things that we're looking into to get more with less, per se. Anyhow, back to the questions.
Yeah. I was going to say, we've got about 10 minutes left before the
questions. Let's go. I get to work 2 after this.
I thought we'll take a personal question. Joker asked. Let me get my quote voice on. Robert. No. Robert. How did you guys get into the whole game dev thing? Have you guys been game devs before, or did you want to do a game and teach yourself everything?
Just go down the chart of each person. Okay, Chris, you're first.
Yeah.
Yeah, you answered it.
Oh, damn it.
Efren, it's all you, buddy. You go first. We believe in you.
I wanted to make games. I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about the process, and I definitely did not want to work for AAAs because I talked to a lot of people that worked in them, and I was like, at 5 p.m. and enjoy my free time, so it's better to just go indie. And that's it.
So you're self-taught then, basically. I mean, I know, but I'm just interjecting here.
Half and half in school, half self-taught. I started doing it before I actually went to school for it. I just went to school for a little extra learning and, getting to know some people in the industry. And
did you do any modding, or did you just jump straight into indie development?
Oh yeah, while I was in school, I did modding. But back in the day, it was like different than today. It's because I was modding. I don't know if you guys remember Medal of Honor.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, Medal of Honor! I love that game.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was heavily into that, and what other? What's this old ass game called Dungeon Siege? I don't know if you remember that one.
I know that.
Yeah. And what else? Just modding different kinds of games and going to school.
Okay.
And then Skyrim got real.
And then let me see. I'll cover the other people that aren't here. I got Derek off of the Steam Workshop. He made some of the best mods there were for XCOM and Stellaris. He would make modding for those, and I was looking for a programmer at the time about 5 years ago. So I was like, who are some of the best programmers you can find? Modders. You know, they always get hired at AAAs. So I was like, let me go and find a modder that I like. And I ended up talking to Derek, and we were like, and the stars aligned. And then basically it was one of those things where it was like he came from a modding standpoint, and he was also traditionally taught C++ at a college. And then I don't know if Michael can talk. I'll just mention. Yeah, I'll talk for Michael.
He's not here anymore.
Michael came from a standpoint of modding Battlefield 2 back in the OG original days. He has some formal college. He worked at Ubisoft doing an internship for Division 1 and for, I think it was Wildlands. Yeah, Wildlands. He worked on those two games for parts. And then from there, he yeeted off to the military. And then decided he wanted to come back and do game design. And then I had known him for like 10 to 15 years. So at that point, he was like a childhood friend. So he ended up coming on and doing our animation. So it was one of those things where it was just basically like that kind of standpoint for Michael. Dimitri is self-taught, indie only. Same thing as Efren. Same reservations as Efren in terms of like he doesn't like AAA. In terms of like the crunch and the soul crunching work that you don't have a say in anything. So it was that kind of standpoint for him. Chris, you want to go? Then I'll go last.
Sure. I more just fell into it. I had no intention of doing game design, but when I started college, they started a game design program, and like I like video games, so let's just go and do that. And ended up doing tons and tons of school. I mean, I got bachelor's in creative writing and master's in game design. Got a certificate in game design from CalArts, you know, and then just any course that taught game design I took, kind of just fell in love with it, and then started working in a lot of indie studios, mostly back in the day working on MMOs. Because I mean, every freaking person on the planet was making MMOs. So that's where I learned that's basically where I cut my teeth. Ran a studio with actually my college teacher who started his own studio, and then eventually worked my way over to working with Robert and been stuck with him for I don't know, a decade now.
I know.
I'm the one crying more.
But from my side of things, I started out. We'll do a speed run. I wanted to be a director, but then that transferred into being a game designer / direct project director for games because I originally saw Jurassic Park, and then that segued into video games when I played Metal Gear Solid 3. And obviously, I started with RTS games. I play everything, and it was one of those things where it was like, once I knew after playing Metal Gear Solid 3, I was like, I want to play games. I want to design games. So then at that point, I went in that tangible direction, teaching myself from YouTube and tutorials. I started out modding Half-Life 2 back in the day of self mods, and for my high school, I made a game per se. And then from there, that segued into just keep self-teaching, keep doing tutorials, and learning the engine, learning C++. I went from Source Engine to Unreal Engine. And pretty much, that was my whole little gist there. I mean, and then we started this in 2017, you figure, roughly. We had worked on a previous prototype, but then we had a falling out. I know Chris, Efren, and Michael from the previous game that we had, but we had a falling out with the co-owner of that company. We all left the IP to him, and we were just kind of mulling around, pissed off because we were just like, nothing was getting done over there. And we ended up basically, I was playing Layer of Billions one day, and I was like, I want to play this but modern. And then I told Chris, and I told everyone else, we were just sitting around just like, what are we going to do? Like, are we going to do games, or does everyone just kind of go off and fizzle out? And we decided in 2017, after we left that other studio, like, fuck it, let's just make Cepheus Protocol. And that's basically the short story of how this game came to fruition, and essentially, like, where we all come from, per se. Anyway, back to you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, that's all right.
I was like, I started talking and I was like, wait, that's not working. I mean, we're about 5 minutes from the scheduled end time. Do you want to like just hang out and just chat for a while longer, or would you like
if there's
sort
good
of wind up
questions,
and
sure.
then-
Otherwise, the moment we can, I want to cut it and have a meeting with Chris and Michael briefly, and then I got to get back on programming.
Okay, so we'll start winding up then. We've got like 3 minutes. So now I need my outro music. Thank you all so much for watching. Smash that subscribe button. Please shoot me.
Will
yeah,
do.
sorry. But in all seriousness, thank you all for coming. This has been a big podcast and quite a big shift for the game. Obviously, I hope we've all put any fears to rest and explained, how fantastic things are going to be moving forward.
I'll keep them updated. I mean, you figure I'm still going to be pinging in the Discord.
No.
Oh
it's
yeah,
gonna be
absolutely.
radio silence
Fuck
now.
everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me see if there's any questions on
Radio silence
YouTube.
from here on out.
But yeah.
Oh.
And of course, thanks to our lovely dev team for showing up. Even if
Literally
Efren's
on fire,
but still showed up.
Oh wait, so hold on. Is there any other questions we should grab before we give the
Just
outro?
windy
Is there
here.
anything else anyone asked?
I mean, we got like 2 minutes left. I doubt we'll be able
That sounds
to
like a
answer anything.
challenge.
Answers B.
Quickly, people.
Yes,
Questions
speed run.
before they run
Yes.
away. Because again, if you got a good question,
You
I'll
run
answer
away.
it, and then I'm gonna go get my coffee and get started on work. Consistent. Oh, I didn't even see your question, Joe. So consistent,
Yeah, 'cause
passionate for experimental is not possible. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, tinsy bit? I want to know more.
It came up in the
Starship
chat
Troopers.
earlier. Some people were asking if you can get some like consistent and detailed patch notes for experimental.
Oh, in general or
releases,
just
and,
recently?
I believe it was.
And that's what I'm asking. Just give me some context.
I think in general.
And then Eagles just joined.
I think.
Okay, so he kind of agrees too. Well, I mean, yeah, just give me some examples. So then that way I have something to work off. So I'm going to be honest. There are some times where I'll push a patch out because someone had a bug or something, and I fix it, and then I put it out as a hotfix on experimental, and I don't write a patch note because I don't want to spam Steam. When it comes to basically like the bigger patch notes, I will agree with you that I do need to do a better job of posting those. Because I don't do a good enough job doing it. The problem is I let myself get overwhelmed, and I downplay it in terms of like, oh, I fixed all this got fixed, so let me just not post it on experimental on the Steam yet, and then it never gets posted, and then what happens is that it gets grandfathered into a big massive post when it gets pushed to public. So that's why sometimes when we push things from experimental to public, it'll be like 500 things. And it was because everything that got changed was just grandfathered into that really big mecha patch, and some of them might have been prerequisite patches that like the notes didn't get put as publicly, kind of deal. So yeah, I can agree with you there. Yeah, I can do better. I
So
hate
you can do
this.
better.
You could always do better.
Yeah, no, I can agree with you guys there. I can work on that. I just need to also get a marketing PR person, I swear. But like when we get to that point, it'll make my life so much easier because then I can push that off the SVM patch notes and they can write it and then post that for me. That's another goal I want to do. Is I think after we get co-op implemented and polished, you'll see a like extension of the team, I imagine, happen from like the influx of more money we're making monthly. And that's one of the things I want to do is having a PR marketing person that kind of helps push the game out there, gets influencers to play the game, does the social media, does the post, so to keep you guys informed, and does like a regular weekly blog. And I just relay information to them, and then they relay it in that post, so there's always consistency. Because again, like I wear so many goddamn hats that sometimes things can fall through the crack. I mean, we're like trying to be a AAA indie RTS game, whatever, a AAA indie team with like five people, 5 to 6
That's a
people,
lot of
basically.
acronyms.
You know, so it's like, yeah, okay. So
Quad A.
literally, I wear too many hats, and that's my fault. You know, so I need to delegate that, or we have the money to delegate it, and I'll do my best to improve that for the time being until we can get someone in there permanently. Let's see. So the co-op estimate would be end of Q1 now. So at the end of March would be the goal. I mean, ideally, you guys will have something to start playing around February. Regardless, sometime in the next week or so, we'll resume builds on experimental. They basically just have like what you guys saw, and you can play test that. It's going to be buggy. When you report a bug, there's going to be, especially if it's for the TPS stuff, it won't be prioritized. The prioritization will be towards the RTS aspect. And the idea is that, you know, we're prioritizing that, we're getting that out there, we're putting the experimental patch notes up, so that way you guys know what we're doing in that branch. And then we just, you know, you guys have these podcasts. So you have your direct line of contact every week where it's like, this is happening. I like this. I don't like that. I mean, these podcasts are a great place for you guys to voice your concerns, good or bad, in terms of like, we put out a build before the podcast earlier in the week. You guys can basically look at us and be like, I like this. I didn't like this. Or we can have a discussion of like, just the mechanic they got in this week. Like, we put in the vehicles, chaos vehicles again, and we improve their AI. What do you guys feel like? Should we spend another week? How does it feel? X, Y, and Z. Jokup asked the question, how long do you think will the vehicle AI take for the air vehicles? Wait, for the air vehicles too? Oh, you're asking about... Okay, so that's something that me and Derek were talking about going into this week, is that he was going to port over the chaos vehicles from Cepheus, make the improvements that are needed, and then from there, we were going to have a proper hierarchy of how the helicopters are. Because right now, there's a class that is part of the issue. Another reason why we're doing this refactor called new vehicle base. And that new vehicle base class is the child for vehicles and helicopters. And there's too much shared code for helicopters and vehicles in that class, instead of having a proper distinction where it should have been vehicles, and then it diverges into ground vehicles and air vehicles. And then that way you have more discipline and separation of duties. And that way it makes it easier to do changes that don't replicate out to both of them accidentally. So part of what you're saying is doing that diversion, that break of responsibilities, and then implementing the AI flying vehicles. Now, one of the things that myself and Derek are going to be looking into is, I'm not going to make a promise for this, but we're going to look into it and see if it's possible, is that we wanted to see if we could make an AI navigation mesh just for the helicopters. So then that way they would fly on that navigation mesh, and that way they would avoid buildings. So it's one of those things where I'm going to try and fit it in. Worst case, you get the helicopters exactly how they are now, but they're easier to bug fix and improve. You know, and then we just spend a little bit longer fixing it. Because like as it stands right now, we're going from a top-down standpoint. We're doing the infantry, we're doing the core systems, and then going into next week, we'll put the vehicles in and all that, and then we'll rearrange the formation system, make sure all that's working, make sure the chaos is working with co-op and all that stuff. Get so the infantry and the ground vehicles are operating. Then we'll make the helicopter class. We'll start putting over the drone and all that, get those functional and working. And then somewhere along that as well, we'll implement it in the engineer building and redo that. Because I hate the engineer building. Like that teleport shit they do, like that was just overdone. Like there should never have been teleport logic allowed in the engineer's post-build stuck fix. It should have just been done correctly from the get-go of like, you're going to build something, you need to take the bounds, you need to extract that bounds into an extent of a certain distance away so you don't try and walk into the object. And then you need to have an acceptable radius that you walk within. And then they walk within that radius and then they build said structure. And the bounds allows it to calculate dynamically. So a designer is not going in and presetting points Like the current system is preset points from a programmer of where they have to go to build, and it's so bad. Like that's an example of like a legacy system where that needs to be dynamic. For your question, feed the need 3 for rooftop buildings. That'd be next month. That would be part of the infected section because we'd have to figure out the nav links and get that situated. So again, it's gonna be just a flow of just like we're doing this in layers, we're getting the foundation, we're getting the new UI in, and then in February, going into the infected, that's gonna be the interaction with Cirque. It's going to be basically doing the things that we've talked about for years in terms of like the climbing of buildings and whatnot. So we'll prototype that, we'll test it, we'll get it in there, and then we'll show you guys. So like, yeah, that's part of it. When we do that, then we'll remove the restrictions on not being able to build on rooftops. But again, that's just in there until we can. Any other questions? How long do you think the vehicle AI will... I already did that one. For the future planes too, or did they get other systems different from the helicopters? What future planes? You talking about like the Harrier and all that stuff? We were talking about like the Predator drone that was speculative? So those are on my wish list. Like if I can sneak them in, I'll sneak them in, but they're low priority because they're not mission critical. It is nice to have, but we already have enough bells and whistles and things going on. So if the stars align and I can get them in, I'll get them in. If I can't, it'll be pushed off a little bit longer. But they're on, yeah, I'm thinking about them. Okay, so if there's not any other questions for anyone, then we're gonna wrap it up.
I don't know.
Only Joe has any questions. Nobody wants to talk on voice ever. I'm so sad. They used to talk all the time.
Well, we don't. That's probably our fault a little bit.
Right? Nobody ever
we've
raises
scared
their
them off.
hand. Like I love it when we used to have voice questions.
Well, next time I'll make an effort to actually be like, hey.
No, it's having 2 Australians
Intimidating.
in the room. It just scares
It's the
everybody
accents.
off.
I know. It's
Wow.
all right.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's about it. Again, thank you all for coming. I'm not going to go over the outro again.
Okay, so again, thank you guys all for coming. We love that you guys take the time to come here every week and talk to us about your concerns about the game. Give us honest, critical feedback. That's always welcomed, And that if you want to support us, consider picking up one of the support packs on Steam. Consider our Patreon. Consider one of the, buying the book, kind of deal on Amazon or on Steam. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much.